California finally voted to legalize cannabis.
Oh, there's gonna be a cannabis explosion. Everybody's gonna be all hyped.
I would have never imagined taking cannabis with my parents.
With 15 million Latinos living here, what stakes do we have in this estimated billion-dollar industry? Hola, mi gente. This is your host, Mala, and today we're talking cannabis. Historically, Black and brown communities have been incarcerated at much higher rates than whites for cannabis use, even though studies have shown, and the streets will tell you, that we all pretty much smoke about the same. This has led to years of trauma, stigma, and fear around cannabis. But you know, with legal weed industries booming for white men in states like Colorado, what do we gotta do to be players in this game? Can we embrace cannabis in time to join this movement? Or is the cannabis industry ready to embrace us?
So I went to Long Beach to meet Tony Vargas, a 27-year-old who recently started her own cannabis edible business, Holistic Love. I want to talk to someone who is experiencing changes in the industry firsthand.
I smoked with my parents a couple weeks ago. I would have never ever imagined taking cannabis with my parents, let alone them knowing that I was in the cannabis space. It's becoming more normalized and I love it.
Tony was fresh out of culinary school when she applied for a job as a baker through a nondescript Craigslist ad. What she didn't know was that she would be baking edibles.
Coming from a Latino background, I knew that my family probably wouldn't approve just because of the whole negative stigma behind it.
Tony was moved by the medicinal properties of cannabis and began to educate herself. But fighting the stigma that came with it took time.
When you got that interview and that job offer, did you tell your family right away that you were going to work there, or how did that work?
I was kind of in the green closet for a little bit.
For a long time, I had asked her where she worked, and she would always say, at a bakery. And I would always ask her, well, can you bring us some goodies, some leftovers?
Oh, I see.
So she was always going around in circles until something just didn't feel right, and one of my nieces mentioned something and it clicked. And my dad used to always say, once you smoke once, that's it, you're addicted.
Hold up. We gotta find out where all this marijuana madness is coming from.
Contrary to popular belief, marijuana, or cannabis, its scientific name, is not a Mexican plant, but actually native to Central and South Asia. It has spread in the last 500 years all over the world, from hashish in the Middle East to cannabis tinctures in Europe, and Spanish conquistadores brought it to Mexico in the 16th century. At a time of massive social change and conflict between rich and poor, Mexican society and media in the 19th century pinned marijuana as a substance for the lowest classes of society. With the movement of borders and of people and plenty of class conflicts in the US, it's no wonder some of these ideas permeated throughout American culture. In the early 20th century, US lawmakers, wealthy companies, and others took up these ideas to turn the American public against cannabis. They started blaming cannabis for making Latinos and African Americans go on crime sprees, while also making you lazy. Mexicans also happened to be the scapegoats for massive unemployment and other social issues. By the 1930s, 29 states, many in the Southwest, had outlawed marijuana. By 1937, at the height of the Depression, Congress passed the Marijuana Tax Act, which effectively criminalized marijuana throughout the U.S.
Throughout United States history, drug legislation has been closely tied to race, racial order, and racial control.
Professor Hernandez is one of the nation's leading historians of race, policing, immigration, and incarceration in the United States.
We invented something called deportation and immigrant detention to manage Chinese immigration. We also invented drug control legislation during this time period. The second wave of anti-drug legislation was really organized around managing the mobility and the power of African Americans after the end of slavery. The third and fourth wave of drug legislation was really around managing Mexican immigration into the United States and Mexican mobility within the United States. The idea during this time period, the 1920s and 1930s, was that Mexicans in particular were the ones who were using marijuana, and that if we could control marijuana, we could control the movement of Mexicans into and throughout the United States.
Some research shows policymakers chose to name it the Marijuana Tax Act instead of its common or scientific name cannabis, which helped make a simple racist equation. Marijuana equals Mexicans equals bad hombres. But of course, that didn't stop cannabis use, and by the 1960s, weed was the drug of choice for the white middle class. In the 1970s, at a moment where people of color and women were seeing gains thanks to the civil rights and black and brown power movements, Nixon used fear of weed to launch the first shots in a decades-long war on drugs and on African Americans and immigrants. He put special attention and resources on the border to try and supposedly stop marijuana flows, putting more money into border patrols and in policing and deporting immigrants. Sound familiar? Every administration since then has contributed to the war on drugs, from Reagan, the Bushes, to Clinton, and Obama. Militarized police came down hard across communities of color and the border, with SWAT tactics, mandatory minimum sentences for drugs, 3 strikes laws, and even the first phases of a border wall. In other words, it's been 40+ years of more money out to cops, weapons, and prisons instead of services and education to make sure communities of color get a fair chance to live our best lives.
I think it's really important for us to think historically about drug legislation because history gives us our frames of reference, as James Baldwin once put it. And if we don't go back to unpack and unravel how we got to our contemporary moment of what is good and what is bad, it's very difficult for us to chart a new way forward.
Professor Hernandez made it clear that history informs the negative perceptions we have around cannabis. Pero regardless of its criminalization, cannabis is hella popular. In fact, it's the 3rd most popular recreational drug behind alcohol and tobacco. Policing its use has cost taxpayers about $10 billion annually and also results in 600,000 people incarcerated each year. What can we expect from Prop 64? I spoke with Eunices Hernandez of the Drug Policy Alliance to find out.
Oh, there's gonna be a cannabis explosion. Everybody's gonna be all high. People are gonna be smoking in the streets. There's gonna be so much smoke. Those are the misconceptions that like a lot of the older generations are afraid of, but also like parents, you know?
As of January 2018, if you're 21 and over, you can possess, transport, purchase, consume, and share up to an ounce of non-medical cannabis, grow up to 6 plants in your household out of view and secure from children. You still cannot smoke in public or drive high. It also allows local government regulation on cannabis businesses like zoning, permitting, and licensing. If you have any cannabis-related offenses on your record, guess what? You can get rid of them. California can also collect taxes, which can potentially go back into community resources.
What we haven't done around Prop 64 is the education piece and the destigmatization piece of the older Latino community.
How would all of this play out federally?
Marijuana is still a Schedule I drug, meaning that if the feds wanted to come in and waste their resources in shutting down dispensaries, they could. But because states have their own sovereign rights, we have the opportunity to legalize marijuana.
Eunices also explains that it takes a lot of money, resources, and support to gain access to the industry. And so far, communities of color have been left out. Tony from Holistic Love is fighting to make her place in the industry. And sometimes that fight starts at home.
My favorite parts of working with cannabis is I know that it's helping people. My grandfather has suffered with chronic pain most of his life, and he's on a ton of opiates, and cannabis help with pain management.
Right.
I wanted a natural alternative to him medicating himself, treating his pain. So a lot of my stuff is healthier based. He started taking it, and little by little, he has stopped with some of his pain meds.
I had to sit down with her and I asked her if this is what she really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And she conveyed her passion and the reason behind it.
I told her I want to start a cannabis bakery because there's not any companies out there that are offering healthy edibles. It is a family-run business, so I get to work with my mom, with my tia. We want to be a women-run company.
So legalization is changing the tide for Cali, hopefully changing people's minds and openness towards cannabis. But how does that change access to the industry? Tony is still waiting on her state licensing and her local licensing as fees associated continue to rise. Navigating the system can be overwhelming, but if all goes well, Tony could be one of the few Latina entrepreneurs to enter a market that will be worth $7 billion in California by 2019. Pero as Professor Hernandez and Eunices pointed out, things are not as great as they seem for those most marginalized. The labor of people of color has always been crucial to making this industry work.
So what happens to them now? Thank you for watching episode 1 of Voices, a mitu original docuseries. We know there's a lot we didn't get to touch on when it comes to covering Latinos and cannabis, but we're hoping that this gets the conversation started. So comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Stay tuned for episode 2, where we shed light on the unseen labor practices behind the cannabis industry.